Today's lecture is about using the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. Quadratic equation is any equation that can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, where a, b, and c are constant and a is not 0. It's called a quadratic equation. The form a x squared plus bx plus c equals to 0 is called standard form for quadratic equation. So today we want to use the quadratic formula, though, to solve equations of this type. So the quadratic formula, or the solution, right? This is the answer. X is equal to minus b, that's the number in front of x, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4. A is always the number in front of x squared, times c, where c is the constant, right? All over 2a. So if we take this example below, this example says that solve x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals to 0. So we want to use a quadratic formula. So here we like to identify what's a, what's b, and what's c. So a is 1, b is -5, and c is 6. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take these numbers, replace the A, the B, and the A and the C's in the formula with these numbers, and then simplify the expression. So that means X is going to be equal to minus B. So minus B, what's the value of B? B is -5. All right, I put the parentheses because the double negative. And then plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's -5 squared, minus 4 times the value of a times the value of c, all over 2 times the value of a, which is 1, right? So all we have to do now is simplify this, and we are done. So let's simplify further. Double negative, a negative times a negative is positive, so you get 5 plus or minus the square root of -5 squared is going to be 25, and then 4 times 1 times 6, so that's 24, all over 2. All right, so we continue over here. So this says x then is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 1 when you subtract 24 from 5 over 2. We know that the square root of 1 is 1, so x is plus or minus 1 over 2. So the quadratic equation always gives you two solutions. So we can separate it here since the answer is just going to be integers. So this means x is equal to 5 plus 1 over 2. That's when you use a positive value. And x is also, well, or x is 5 minus 1 over 2. So if we simplify these, you get x is 6 over 2, or x is 4 over 2. So thus, the solution, when you reduce these two, you get that x is 3, or x is equal to 2. So this would be the solution for this example. Of course, you could check, right? So let's check one of them just to make sure we have the right answer. So if you want to check the answer, then you take one of these values. So I'm just going to take the 2, right? I'm only going to check one of them and see if it satisfies both sides. So is 2 square if I replace x with 2, and I subtract that from 5 times 2, and then I add 6 to it, do I get 0? Well, 2 squared is 4, and 5 times 2 is 10, and plus 6. Is that 0? Well, if you subtract 10 from 4, you get negative 6 plus 6, and so we get 0 is 0. So check, right? So 2 is actually a solution. So that's how the quadratic formula works. You just identify A, B, C, and then you substitute it in the formula. So you would have to memorize the formula. Let's try another example. Suppose we want to solve 2x squared minus 5x equals to 3, and we're using the quadratic formula. So here the goal is to identify A, B, and C. So notice that the 3 is over here, where we should have 0. So that means we have to move the 3 over first, because in the quadratic formula, the definition, you need 0 on one side. So we don't have 0 in this example. So we have to move the 3 over by subtracting 3. So you can subtract 3 on this side and on this side. And so what you have is 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 equals to 0. So you need it to be in this form first before you can identify A, B, C, right? You must have 0 on one side, right? Don't forget that. All right, so now we can say A is equal to 2, B is equal to negative 5, and C is equal to negative 3, right? Not 3. If you try to do it up here without moving the 3 over, you're going to think that C is positive 3 when it should be negative. All right, so now we need to substitute it in the formula. So X now is equal to minus B, so we get double negative again, plus or minus the square root of minus B square minus 4 times A is 2, times C, which is negative 3, all over 2 times A, which is 2. All right, so if we try to simplify, then X is going to be 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25. And then here we multiply negative 4 times 2 times negative 3. So remember, a negative times a negative is positive. So the result of this is going to be positive. So now we have to multiply 4 times 2, which is 8. 8 times 3 is 24 over 4. So now what we have is X is 5 plus or minus the square root of 49. Okay. All right, so now we know what the square root of 49 is. The square root of 49 is 7. So that means X is going to be 5 plus or minus 7 over 4. So we can separate again. So that means x is equal to 5 plus 7 over 4, or x is equal to 5 minus 7 over 4. So if you add the numerator, you get x is 12, 7 and 5, 12 over 4, which is 3, or x is negative 2. 5 minus 7 is negative 2 over 4. So x is 3, or x is negative 1/2 when you reduce negative 2 over 4. So that's your two answers. You can, try to check one of them to see if it works. All right, so remember the formula. I'm going to bring it with me because I will need to use it for the next example. So here's another example here. So I need you to see the formula for when I substitute it in. All right, so we want to solve by using the quadratic formula. 5x squared minus 4x equals to 0. So first we have to identify A, B, and C. So what is A in this scenario? A is going to be 5. And what is B? B is negative 4. Okay, now what is C? Well, there is no constant here, right? There's no number after the x. So when that happens, then C will be 0. All right, so in this case, our C is going to be 0 because there's no number. All right, so now we just substitute it in the formula to say x is equal to minus b, double negative again, so a lot of double negatives, plus or minus the square root of minus 4 square minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is 0, all over 2 times a. All right, so if we simplify this further, we get double negative become positive, plus, so 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is 16. And then you multiply by 0, so that part is going to go to 0. So 16 minus 0 is just 16 all over 10. So this means x then is 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. So we all know the square root of 16 is 4 over 10. So we separate again. So x is 4 plus 4 over 10, or x is 4 minus 4 over 10. So we simplify both of these. So x is 4 plus 4 is 8 over 10, which says that if you reduce by dividing top and bottom by 2, you get x is 4 over 5. Or in the other case, 4 minus 4 is 0, so you get 0 over 10. And so 0 divided by 10 is just 0. So the two solutions would be 4 over 5 and or 0, or x equal to 0. All right, so we try another one. Again, let's bring the formula with us. All right, so here, we want to do the same thing. And again, we do not have 0. So this one says solve by using the quadratic formula. And we want to solve x squared minus 1 equals to 4x. Well, first we have to rewrite it. So we have to have 0 on one side. So we have to cancel this 4x that's on the right and move it over to the left. And so that part goes away. So what you have is x squared, and then we cannot combine, right? These are not like terms. I cannot subtract 4x from 1, nor can I subtract 4x from x squared. So I have to leave 4x as is because it's not a like term with any of the terms that I have. And so equal to 0. So again, you must have 0 on one side. So if there's a number on one side by itself, you have to move it over to get 0 on one side. So now we can identify A, B, and C. So A is equal to 1, B is equal to -4, and C is equal to -1. So now we substitute it inside the formula again, and so you get x is equal to minus -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4. A is 1 and C is -1, all over 2 times A. So if we try to simplify, so then you get x is equal to +4, double negative again, plus or minus 4 squared is 16. And then we have double negative, right? -4 times -1, that's +4. So this gives you +4 all over 2. So what we have is x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. So now we have to simplify the square root of 20. So the square root of 20 is not an integer, but we can write 20 as 4 times 5, right? So if we write 20 as 4 times 5, then we can take the square root of 4. Sorry, right. Square root of 20 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. So here you can say this is the square root of 4 times the square root of 5, right? Because 4 times 5 is 20 over 2. I write it that way to show you that you can take the square root of 4, but the square root of 5 we cannot take, so we're going to leave it inside the square root. So then you get x is 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 5 over 2. So here you can separate if you want, or you can keep it together since it's not going to be an integer answer because we have the square root of 5. So normally when you have like the square root of 5 or not an integer answer, you keep it together. You don't have to, you can separate like we did above, but I'm going to show you what I mean, keep it together. So you can say now x is equal to 4. Well, actually, I said yes. 4 over 2 plus or minus 2 over 2 square root of 5, right? So when I say divide by 2 here, means that each term has to be divided by 2. So you must divide the 2 into 4 and the 2 into the 2 square root of 5. So when you reduce, then you get 2 plus or minus the square root of 5. So here's what I'm talking about, keeping it together instead of separating it into two answer, which is x is equal to 2 plus square root of 5, or x is equal to 2 minus the square root of 5. You can just leave it like this, right? This is perfectly fine. And remember, you cannot combine the 2 plus square root of 5, right? They're not like terms, let's say. So you have to stop here. So this would be your answer if you keep it together, or you can separate it as 2 plus square root of 5 and 2 minus square root of 5. All right. So let's try one last one. So here, so I need to keep the formula again. So same idea. We're using the quadratic formula. And so we have 0 on one side, so we don't have to do anything. So this problem says solve by using the quadratic formula. And we're trying to solve 2x squared plus 4x plus 5 equals to 0. So we're trying to solve that. So we have to identify A, B, and C again. So A is equal to 2, B is equal to 4, and C is equal to 5. So we substitute them in the formula. So x is equal to minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 square minus 4ac. And we are dividing that by 2 times a, which is 2. All right, so we simplify. So x is minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 square, which equals to 16. And now we multiply, so negative 4 times 2 times 5, so the result is going to be negative. There's only one negative, right? And then 4 times 2 is 8, times 5 is 40. So all over 4. So now we say x is equal to minus 4 plus or minus the square root of, when you subtract 40 from 16, you get negative 24. So because the negative is in the square root, the result is going to be an imaginary number, right? Because you cannot take the square root. The square root of a negative number is not a real number. It's imaginary. So we are allowed to use imaginary. So we're going to change this negative. Remember that the square root of negative 1 is represented by I, right? So that means this becomes x is minus 4 plus or minus. So I'm going to break up the 24 into 3 parts, right? 4 times 6, and then square root of negative 1. So 4, because we can take the square root of 4. The 6 we cannot take the square root of, so it's going to remain in the square root. And the square root of negative 1, we're going to change that to I. So if we rewrite, you get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2, then the square root of 6, and then I. The I is not under the square root, okay? So some students put it under the square root. It doesn't belong on this under the square root. Square root of negative 1 is I, so it's not under the square root. And this is all over 4. So if we separate them now, so then this becomes x is negative 4 over 4 plus or minus 2 over 4 square root of 6i. So 4 over 4, negative 4 over 4 is now negative 1, plus or minus 2 over 4 is a half. So we can actually write this as square root of 6 over 2, and then I. Again, the I is not under the square root. That's very important. All right, so that would be the solution to this problem. All right, so that's solving quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, which is x is minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now below I have some problems for you to practice with on your own and check your solution with mine. If there's a difference, you could type in the chat.